Hey guys, welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about tips for studying for standardized exams, so things like the MCAT or the UCAT or any other medical school entrance exam test that you can think of. The reason I'm keeping this super general is because I feel like these are things that everyone says, but we don't really know why. I had a really hard time following these tips when they were given to me as well, and I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of why they're important. So yeah, let's get started. The first thing I want to mention is that I'm coming at this from a very personal perspective. I don't think that I have tried all the methods there are for test taking and concluded that these 5 tips are the best and you have to do them. But I have gotten a lot better over the years, and I do think it's because of some of these things that I've done. So yeah, let's get into it. The main thing to remember with any kind of big exam, whether it's the MCAT, the UCAT, the GMAT, LSAT, GAMSAT, the whatever other kind of CAT or SAT you can think of. The thing to remember is that it's a standardized test, which means that it follows a very specific structure, and you'll have many years worth of practice exams that you can use as a resource. So what I would really suggest, and what I did for myself, is that I researched the structure of the exam well before I started studying, and what that allowed me to do is figure out where I need to spend the most amount of time and allocate my efforts accordingly. That's what I realized is the thing that's different from studying for a standardized test versus studying for class, is that when you're studying for a standardized test, it's really all about getting the right answers. It's more so about getting that check mark at the end of the test, whereas studying for class is more about understanding the material and really processing it and being able to make connections with it. For an exam like the MCAT, what I'm doing is studying as efficiently as I possibly can to get those marks, and that's the priority. You want to maximize efficiency, you want to maximize the time that you're using, because ideally you have already learned and understood all the material beforehand. So in situations where you have seen the material before, what you're going to be spending your time on mostly is doing practice questions, practice tests, and really nailing down specific test-taking techniques, whether it's time management, stress management, or like multiple choice versus rating. Most of the time, however, that isn't the case, and that is what I personally experienced, and that brings us to my next tip, which is learn and relearn concepts while doing practice questions. For example, when I was doing a section on biology, say, I would have all the questions that were related to that topic, and I would answer as many of them as I could. If I got to a particular section or a group of questions that I just couldn't do, I would go back and review the topics, either using Khan Academy or resources online. I would really suggest Khan Academy because they're quite comprehensive, but the videos can be quite dry or just slow. So what I did was I worked myself up to watching the videos at about 2 times speed, and that made them a lot better. Another thing I wanted to talk about is assessing yourself as frequently as you can. During the first few weeks that I was studying, I would do practice tests every week, and this was just to assess whether I was spending my time in the right places. So at the beginning of every week, I would do a practice test in full and mark it to see how well I did. And if general chemistry was going really well, the next week I would spend a little bit more time doing physics, or vice versa. And this is a tip that I would get from a lot of people. It's a very common tip that people give, and I never believed it. I didn't want to do it. My thought process was that I'm going to spend most of my time understanding everything, and then I'll do practice tests. Let's be clear, this is not an efficient way to prep for a big exam. The more practice tests that you do, the more exposure that you'll get to the type of questions that you'll encounter. And the more that happens, the less anxiety you'll have, because you're going to be putting yourself in the test environment. So when you get there on the big day, you'll be well prepared, because you'll know exactly what kind of feelings you'll have, what kind of anxieties you'll have, and you'll be coping with them more efficiently because you've been through the process multiple times. Preparing yourself for an exam like this isn't just about memorizing all the material you possibly can and learning everything as much as you can, but it's also about managing your stress and preparing yourself for a stress-inducing environment like test day is. So after working on practice questions and reviewing concepts, I got comfortable with the idea of solely relying on practice tests for my studying. Of course, this didn't go really well in the beginning. I would do a whole test and only get maybe like a 30% at the end, which was a little bit disheartening. But doing practice test after practice test made me feel so much more comfortable with the kind of questions that I was encountering. Some days I would do the whole test, and some days I would just do certain sections that I thought I needed to work on. And this is something I'd really recommend that you do as well. I know it can feel quite nerve-wracking because you feel like you need to cram as much as you can into your head before you do a big test. But the exposure that you get through doing practice tests over and over again is actually a better bang for your buck than simply writing notes or reading material. To make sure that you're really understanding concepts though, it's important to review your tests once you've finished. This is something that I had a really hard time coming to terms with, but I found that once I started doing this, my grades really did improve. I had hit a plateau where my grades weren't going up anymore, and I found that by reviewing the test answers that I did, the right ones just as carefully as the wrong ones, my mark did go up. I found that oftentimes I was guessing the right answer instead of actually understanding why I was right. So what I started doing was highlighting all the questions that I guessed as well as all the questions that I'd gotten wrong. And then I looked at the topics that these questions were about, categorized all of them, and then reviewed those topics in particular. This is an extensive process. Yes. This is an annoying process. Also yes. But I learned the most material doing this but I learned and remembered the most material by doing this as opposed to writing notes and watching videos over and over and over again. What this did was force me to look at concepts that I haven't understood repeatedly until it found a way to stick in my brain. Okay, this might sound a bit philosophical or a bit profound or a bit woo-woo, whatever. But self-awareness is such an important thing when you're studying. I found that there were a lot of times that I would sit down to study for an exam and it would just be a big waste of time because I would be sitting there convincing myself that I'd understood something when I really hadn't. I didn't even know what questions to ask. That's how poorly I'd understood the concept. What I've realized over the years is that learning is supposed to be a humbling process. I can't learn when I've got this huge ego and I'm convincing myself and expecting myself to be smarter and understand everything on the first go. Once I got over this hurdle of I need to be smart because I can't look stupid, it got a lot easier to just admit when I didn't understand something and then work through that confusion to a point where I could comprehend a particular topic. And if that takes 1, 2, 3, 4 resources that you have to look up, that's not a big deal. In fact, I think that you're a smarter person for doing so because you're putting in everything that you can to understand a topic properly. Honestly, sometimes I think this is just me reminding myself of these kind of things. Because yeah, I guess we all need the reminder from time to time. I certainly have some fears about medical school, which will be starting in a couple of weeks, and this was a really good way, I think, for me to remind myself that I have learned from my mistakes and that I don't study like I used to, that I actually know what I'm doing now. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity, guys. Anyway, that's the end of this video. I hope these tips helped. If you liked what you saw, then give me a big ol' thumbs up. And if you want to see more of me, maybe hit the subscribe button. I don't know. It's an option. It's there. I will see you guys next week. Bye.